Recording in progress.
So we're online.
We're online
on the air.
on the air.
Can you say on the air
Yeah.
with this sort of thing? Okay. We are on the air. Jordan, I see a J. I assume that's you. We can't hear you though. Are you really up and about out there on the West Coast? Well, you let us know when you're there, okay? I'm going to start. Walked into the library, and Melanie, the head librarian, is that what you are?
Yeah, sure.
What's your official?
Library director.
The library director, same thing as the head
Same.
librarian. She had these wonderful, now if I hold it that way, I don't see the glare. Can they see it?
Yep.
Alrighty. I don't expect Jordan to come all the way to the East Coast to pick these out of the library, but they are absolutely great reads. This one, I should have just read to you what was it, a week, 2 or 4 weeks ago when
Yeah.
we talked about precipitation, because how the clouds form, and it was perfect for anybody from, I don't know, 8 to 80. Then later on in the program, we are going to talk about blizzards. Melanie looked up the definition. She'll tell you what it is later. You know, scientists are rather specific. Any old snowstorm isn't necessarily a blizzard. It has to meet certain qualifications. And finally, just a good old-fashioned snow story. Ta-da. Okay. And I'm sure your library, wherever you live, has great books about winter and snow, etc., and the weather, so you can get them out. We're going to talk about the blizzard of last week later in this program, but right now, Melanie had looked up some information I asked last week on Friday, I think it was, at the beginning of the big storm for us in Allegheny County, about temperature drops out in Wyoming, was it?
Yeah, Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Okay, so what happened out there in Cheyenne? I think the day before.
Yeah, Thursday.
Thursday.
They experienced a 42-degree drop in 1 hour, but the most significant drop was in half an hour, where it dropped 40 degrees.
40 degrees in a half hour.
Yeah, between 1:05 p.m. it was 43 degrees, and then at 1:35 p.m. it was only 3 degrees.
Well, they beat us because I was aware of this weather front coming through on Friday, and at 9 o'clock, yeah, 9 o'clock, it was 34 degrees up on the hill outside of Alfred, and by 9:30, and it was drizzling and the wind was out of the east, and between then and 9:30, the wind shifted to the west, the rain drizzle changed to snow, and the temperature dropped for us 10 degrees in that half hour. And then it kept going down, down, down till it hit the following morning. It was 8 below. Now that wouldn't have been so bad, except the wind was blowing pretty steadily at 40 to 50 miles an hour for 2 whole days, or 2.5 days really, before it began to die off. Not so much gusty.
Just steady.
Steady. I think one of the reasons I only got an inch of snow on my 10 acres of meadow is that it kept blowing to the east.
Yeah.
It didn't settle down. So anyway, it was really hard to keep warm. And today, it's a week later, it's Friday. And as I parked my car here in the village, it was 51 degrees. So in February, when we wrap up this weather Zoom program, the 2 last episodes in February, we're basically going to talk about how climate change in the last 50 years is changing our day-to-day weather. All righty. So I have relabeled our winters here in Allegheny County, our new normal. I call them the yo-yo winters, because you're old enough to remember. I'm really old enough to remember in the old days. I love that phrase lately. Winter came around election day, and it didn't go away until the end of March, early April.
Right.
Yeah, and it was pretty steady. And now, the last 10 years or so, it's a few days of this cold, although not as cold as 8 below in a long time. It's goes up. It felt like spring when I opened the
That's
door.
exactly what I said.
It was springtime again. And my cat loved it because she hates the cold. But it's not good for the plants if you're a gardener. And by the way, should we mention that we're going to do the gardening again
Yeah.
come March? Okay, we were fairly successful last spring, summer, and fall. I think it was 13 sessions over 7 months, something like that. Yeah, oh no, more than 13. Well, whatever it was. And we had about 10 people a time. One or two would be here, in person, and the rest of you whom I don't know who you are out there in the virtual world tuned in on the average. So we decided to do another grow your own and maybe kicking it up to, if you were like in college, last year was a 101, real basics. Maybe we'll go up to 102,
Yeah.
sophomore level. We'll still cover some of the basics, but we'll add on, maybe more interesting or complicated or unusual information. Alrighty. We did the books. We talked about it. Alrighty. A very brief review. And by the way, I think I must be psychic because 2 months ago, when I decided on the schedule of how to talk about what, when, this Friday, the end of the year, was the wind. Now, how perfect was that? Considering what happened last weekend. Okay. However, quick review. Most people never think about it. Wave your arms. What's between you and me?
Air.
Air. I can't see it, can I?
Right.
If I could see it, what would that mean as far as seeing you?
You wouldn't be able to see.
People wouldn't be able to see you. It'd be opaque. We'd be blind. Right. So good for us. The air, the nitrogen and the oxygen that makes up almost all of it is translucent. Wonderful stuff. Right. However, how do we know it exists? What's wind? Since that's our topic today. Oh, I didn't. Come on, you know what wind is.
It's the movement of air.
Perfect. The movement of air. And so if we're studying the weather, we have to understand a little bit what makes the wind, what makes the air move and create wind. All righty. We'll get there in a minute. Now, since air is a physical thing made up of molecules, it has something scientists called mass, M-A-S-S. We really aren't going to go down that rabbit hole because most of us here on Earth equate mass with what?
Weight.
Weight. But really, weight is a response of gravity on our mass to whatever is pulling us down to the center of, for us, the Earth. And you know how you can go on a diet without having to do anything?
Go to the moon.
Go to the moon. Because the moon is so much smaller. It has so much less mass. It has less gravity's pull. So on the moon, I think we would, if you weighed 60 pounds here, you'd only weigh 10 pounds there. Now, of course, you'd have to get there.
Right.
It might just be easier to stay here and diet.
Okay.
Okay. Let me think. What am I doing? Okay, talked about the moon. Now, I mentioned 1 or 2 times ago, we don't think about it, but when we're sitting here in the library or walking out to my car or whatever on the surface of the Earth, I'm really existing like a flounder in the sea, which is a bottom feeder. I'm living at the bottom of an ocean of air. And though we're not aware of it, air has weight. Something like 14.5 pounds per square inch.
Wow.
Need a black background. So I kind of made a guess about how many square inches the top of our head was and did the math. We are carrying on our heads all the way up to where the atmosphere runs out. Let's say 50,000 feet up. We're walking around with that column of air. Want to guess Now, I
Oh.
didn't warn her, so this is a wild guess. How much weight are you carrying on your head? She's trying to do the math. It's 500 pounds.
Yeah.
500 pounds. And we think those ladies, those elegant ladies in Africa that used to walk around with the water jugs on their head were something.
Mhm.
But we're all something. 500 pounds on our head. Why don't we feel it? Why don't we? It's like, oh my God, none of us could weight lift 500 pounds. I don't
Right.
think. That's because most of our body is made up of liquids
Mhm.
and gases, and they're at the same pressure.
Mhm.
Remember that can that we crushed
Mhm.
here weeks ago, months ago? If the air pressure inside equals the air pressure outside, then we don't feel anything.
Oh, okay.
Alrighty. However, I don't know if they really did this, but in the old days in the circus,
Mhm.
wasn't there a man that they would shoot out of the rocket?
Oh, yeah.
Did they really do that? Well, if they did, let's imagine we stuff Melanie to a rocket and and it's a powerful rocket, like from Cape Canaveral,
Mhm.
and we shoot her way up 50,000 feet.
Mhm.
What's going to happen to you, Melanie?
No, I don't. My ears are gonna hurt.
That's the least of your problems.
My head will
Yes. What's the last word?
explode.
Your whole body, because the pressure inside is whatever it was. And as you go up, the pressure drops outside, you will explode, which
Mhm.
is why the astronauts, when they do the repairs on the outside of the space station, not only are they tethered to the space station, we don't want them drifting off,
Mhm.
but they're in insulated and pressurized suits, because otherwise they would explode.
Mhm.
And maybe nobody's thought of that, but we've all heard of the bends,
Mhm.
divers.
Mhm.
It's the same thing in reverse.
Mhm.
As you go down into the water, you can go down about 6 fathoms, 36 feet without gear. But anything deeper than that, you're going to need some kind of protection and breathing stuff. And you have to go slowly to acclimate to the greater pressure.
Mhm.
What you're doing is allowing the air that's dissolved as a gas in your blood
Mhm.
to acclimate with the greater pressure. And if you come up too fast, it's like being shot in a rocket, and you get the oxygen bubbles out of your blood
Mhm.
and hemorrhages your lungs, and that's not a good end either.
No.
It's called the bends. All righty. So we've talked about ridiculous things. What happens when you shift the pressure of the air? Now then, I have come up with a wonderful new phrase, all my own. I've never read it anywhere, I don't believe. And that is, what is? The universe believes in equality.
Mhm.
How's that one up for us and one down for Putin? Mr. Putin, the world is not with you. It believes in equality. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you're dealing with a fluid, and fluids, what are the two fluids, basically? What's a fluid? Water
Water.
and
Yeah.
gas.
Gas.
Okay, because it means you have to contain them or they just float away or run away. They don't have any inner support that makes them stay put. Alrighty. And the other great law of the universe is this equality bit. And that's especially true of energy. If you have a source of heat and over here it's cold, remember the old castles in the Middle Ages with the stone walls and the fireplace? The heat is going to try and equalize the overall temperature and warm up that cold wall. And if you have water at a high place, top of the waterfall, it wants to equalize the kinetic energy by running downhill to the ocean. So with gas and water fluids, there's a seeking out of equality, whether it's the temperature or the pressure. And that's really what triggers, I'm going to say, all of our weather, I think. And I don't, we're not doing astronomy and cosmology in this class, but you might want to think about it. When you get worried about the nitty-gritty silly stuff in your life
Mhm.
that really isn't important, think about the end of the world, the end of
Mhm.
the universe. One theory is that gradually this desire for equality is going to make things that are energetic, hot,
Mhm.
high up, cool, low down, so that everything's equal.
Mhm.
And if and when that ever happens, according to one theory of cosmology, everything will literally grind to a halt.
Mhm.
We will reach absolute zero
Mhm.
Kelvin, minus whatever it is, 470 something Fahrenheit. And then there'll just be nothing because
Mhm.
there'll be no movement.
Hmm.
Hmm. Puts all the other little silly problems like 6 feet of snow or whatever
Mhm.
in perspective, right? Okay. Um, so what does this all have to do with the wind? Okay. High to low, hot to cold, equal it all out, turn the page, the wind, finally. Okay. What makes air move? Then is our, to get wind,
Mhm.
we have to have movement. So what causes that? Earlier on, we talked about how warm air expands, becomes less dense, and therefore rises, and cold air becomes denser and it sinks. This is a convection current, same as your pot of boiling water.
Mhm.
You can see the currents going around in your pot, especially if you're making jam. So a convection current on a sunny day with the sun as the source of the warmth can start the wind blowing.
Mhm.
And as I mentioned about sailing, when the sun goes down late in the day, you lose that source of heat energy. The convection currents begin to die, and you'll get stuck out on the lake,
Mhm.
hopefully with a paddle, because you won't be able to sail back to the docks. All righty. So that's one source of heat. By the way, the sun, I'm going to take a wild guess. I read this somewhere statistically, but don't remember the exact number. I'm going to say about 95% of the energy that the earth gets or receives to create the wind and the weather is from the sun.
Mm.
However, there are volcanoes.
Mhm.
There is radioactive decay, which means the center of the earth is gradually cooling off
Mhm.
over time, billions of years. What else? Human beings.
Mm.
I'm sure last week with my wood stove and my electric heater and my oven from time to time to keep my house at 60,
Mm.
whereas it was 8 below outside,
Mhm.
I was losing heat
Mhm.
through in my well insulated walls to
Mhm.
the outside. So we also produce heat,
Mhm.
all right, and especially our cities,
Mm.
heat islands in the summertime. Maybe we'll talk about that later. Um, okay. A difference in pressure.
Mm.
I'm sure, one of the wonderful things about the news, the weather report on television, the only reason I miss television is for the news reports.
Mm.
Because you can, and especially today with satellites
Mhm.
and the folks up there in the, what is it called? The space
Space station.
station. Especially the hurricanes,
Mm.
which we'll talk about in another month. Those great swirling counterclockwise cloud masses that you can see that cover all of Florida.
Mm.
So, where am I going with this? If you have a high and a low air pressure system, one following the other, once again, the air, it is going to create the pressure difference is going to create a wind from the high to
Mhm.
the low. All righty. And we're not going to really go into why because it gets too complicated. But for us in the Northern Hemisphere, if you have a high pressure system, it's going to swirl the winds clockwise around
Mm.
the center. Whereas if it's a low, like those hurricanes, it's always going counterclockwise. around the center.
Hmm.
She wants to know why. No, we're not going there. Look it up.
I'll look it up.
It's the Coriolis effect. Named after, it sounds like a Frenchman, but I'm not sure. Coriolis, whoever he was. And I'm guessing 100 years ago, but I'm not sure. Alrighty. Now the other word they use on the Weather Channel is a gradient.
Mm.
And we're gonna do a mind demonstration here in a minute. But on those maps where you have a high over here and a low over here, depending on how far apart they are and how strong they are, the further apart, the weaker the winds. But
Sure.
the greater the difference, the stronger the winds. So you kind of have to add those two differences up. Now, I did a mind experiment and then I got a little boggled down. So I'm going to try and talk about the part I know for sure. You go out into your garage, your metaphysical garage, right?
Okay.
And every garage has a workbench along the side,
Mhm.
right? Okay. And there's always a few planks of wood leaning up against the
Mhm.
wall. So you're going to find a plank that's about, let's say, 6 feet long. You're going to put the edge of it right there on your workbench,
Mhm.
and the rest is going to go down to the garage floor. So you're going to have a nice, whatever, your workbench say is 3 feet high.
Mhm.
I forget if was that a 45-degree angle? I'm not sure, but you can imagine the slope.
Mhm.
It's pretty steep. Take a tennis ball, let it loose, and what's it going to do?
It's gonna go down to the ground.
It's going to roll down. Yeah, roll down
Mhm.
the plank to the floor at a certain speed.
Mhm.
And you can clock it, and you all this and that and the other thing. Then you go and get a 12-foot plank. It's gonna stretch. You have to move the car out.
Mhm.
Stretch the plank down, do the same thing. What's gonna happen?
It's still gonna roll down,
It's still gonna roll down,
but it's more gradual.
I think, yes, and at least now, sometimes in science, common sense doesn't work,
Mhm.
but I think it's true in this case. It will take longer to get to the floor,
Mhm.
and it's rolling at a slower rate. Pretty sure. In spite of the fact that if you jump out of an airplane without a parachute, you accelerate at, what is it, 32 feet per second,
Mhm.
which means as you move down towards the earth due to gravity, you're going faster and faster.
Mhm.
But I'm not sure that applies to our ball rolling down the plank. Anyway, somebody look it up and let us know where we've wandered off.
Need a physicist.
Yes, a physicist. Or actually do the experiment and clock it. All right. Why was I using this? Oh, so that to me signified the high and the low,
Right.
and the air moving from one to the other. And the steeper the gradient, the faster it rolls.
Right.
And the steepness of the gradient depends on two things: how high
Mhm.
or how intense the high is,
Mhm.
and how low the low is.
Mhm.
And we didn't talk about a barometer. I sometimes wonder in science, it seems like in the early days, say the first 2,000 years, well, 2,500 years since the Greeks jumped into the game 2,500
Mhm.
years ago, all the simple experiments are done.
Mhm.
Think of whoever it was that gave the information to Ptolemy
Mhm.
in the 1st century, I think it was, down in Alexandria, who had traveled south to Aswan
Mhm.
and noticed on June 21st, the sun
Mhm.
is shone straight down the well. And Ptolemy said, that never happens here in Alexandria. Why is that?
Mhm.
And they figured out the circumference of the earth from
Mhm.
that simple observation. Or Newton, because of the plague, had to retire from the university for a while, went back to his country estate and played around with the prism and beams of light.
Mm.
He came up with the rainbow.
Mhm.
So I just wonder if all those simple, amazing
Mhm.
discoveries, are they all used up? Are there any simple ones still out there that one person with something so simple
yeah.
as either his mind or a prism can figure
Mhm.
out? Or do you now need an international team with multi-million dollar pieces of equipment and
Mhm.
figure thing? I don't know.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great to have some teenager in a garage with
Tinkering around.
tinkering around? Okay, maybe they could figure out fusion. Wouldn't that be nice? All righty. So let's leave our virtual garage behind and move on. Da-da-da-da. Okay, then I wanted to go through how various types of wind form. We already talked about, so we won't do it again, the summer convection
Mhm.
currents. Alrighty. I forget, did we talk about fronts coming through? We did, good. So we don't have to do that again. Where's my next page? G3s. Ah, did we talk about sea breezes?
I don't think so.
Okay. Sea breezes are famous if you live on the ocean front, either Long Island or in San Diego, where part of my family lives. Jordan, I see a J there. Are you awake and participating or not?
Think so. I don't know if my mic's working.
He probably went back to sleep. How can we find out?
Jordan, we can't hear you very well.
Or can you hear me at all?
Oh, I hear
Very,
something.
very faintly.
Oh, really? I don't know why the mic's not working. Well, I am here.
Hello? Are you hearing us?
I thought I got a picture of the sea breeze.
What did you?
I thought I got a picture of the sea breezes.
Oh,
Maybe I didn't.
okay. Well, anyway, to go back to San Diego and my grandson who's tuned in, but we can't hear him. Whoops. Oh, perfect. Now, I was thinking, since we don't really live in India or
Yeah,
that
he
parts
can,
of the world where
he
the
can hear us.
he can hear us. Okay. The monsoons really operate on the same basis as a land sea breeze. And let's think about the daytime out in San Diego. Anybody that lives out there knows that if you drive 60 miles east up into the mountains, the daytimes are hot and dry in the summertime. So you're creating this huge air mass that's being heated up, becomes less dense, rises up over the desert. There's no such thing as a vacuum. So if it's rising up, something has to be filling it in. And that comes from, as you can see, from the cooler air that's been sitting over the ocean all night. And so during the day, people who are on the beach or living within very few miles of the coast, get this wonderful sea breeze. And at night, the opposite happens. The land cools down more quickly. The ocean, being water, takes longer to cool down, so it becomes warmer than the land. And the reverse happens. So that's the land sea breeze. Now, I forget, did I ask you the Mountain Valley?
Oh,
Yeah, I did. See what I can forget in 2 weeks.
see what I forgot in 2 weeks.
Okay. Anybody that lives in a hilly country and especially in mountainous country, on any given day, here where I live at 2,240 feet is roughly 1,000 feet above Cornell and or Wellsville. And so on any given day, this is slightly different. I'm going to be about 6 degrees cooler than they are. But what happens is, once again, at night, as the air begins to cool higher up, it sinks. And so you have a night breeze come down off the mountains into the valley, which is also why you live in a valley and you're much more likely to get a frost in spring and fall than I am at the top. Okay, so that's another kind of regional type of breeze that we have. We've all heard of the Santa Ana winds. And by the way, I was going to and never did. I believe it was Raymond Chandler who wrote The Long Goodbye. And I think that's from the book, where if you get that book out of the library, if I'm right, the very first page or two, the author is describing the Santa Ana winds and how it makes everybody crazy. And murders go up and robberies go up and all of this and that. Well, the Santa Ana is probably an example of an extreme land sea breeze coming from the desert, a hot, dry wind that blows down through the mountain passes out over the coastal plain. We have a monsoon in the southwest, down in Arizona and New Mexico. And usually it occurs in July and August, maybe into September. And that's usually when I drove west, when I was doing that all those years ago. And so I've run through several downpours, and what's happening once, and I didn't ask you to look this up.
No,
Why?
no.
No. Okay, guys, everybody, you should have geography picture in your head of the United States. Go to the lower left-hand corner, and there's the Baja Peninsula in Mexico with the Sea of Cortez in between. And then California, Arizona, New Mexico. Switch my hand around because I'm looking at it the way you. And so in the summertime, two things could happen. That warm, moist maritime tropical air could move up out of the Sea of Cortez, or possibly from the Gulf of Mexico, which is a little further away, and encounter colder, drier as it raises up over the mountains, turns into pretty violent, sometimes rainstorms. The Navajo call them the male rains of the summertime with the thunder and the lightning. So, and that, by the way, because of those monsoon rains down there in the southwest, especially Arizona, the Sonoran Desert is possible. Some call it the desert forest, I think, because the rain, you have a double rain season. You have the gentle rains of winter, November, December, January. But if that's all you had, you would have a true desert. But because the rains come in July and August, pretty heavy at times locally, it's able to support the Sonoran Desert, a wonderful, it's those saguaro and the ocotillo and lots of other kinds of cactus. The only it's a very interesting biosystem because they don't grow anywhere else in the world, just ours. Alrighty, what else here? The westerlies. Alrighty, way back when, a month or so ago, we talked about if you lived under the equator, give or take 10 or so degrees, the real tropical zone, you tended to have thunderstorms every day because it's hot and it's humid and the air is going up, but we live on this wonderful sphere. And so it drifts, once again, equalizing towards the north. It runs out of steam about 30 degrees north and south, sinks down, becomes dry, hot. And if you look at the map of the world, at 30 degrees north, especially where most of the land is, and 30 degrees south, that's where your big deserts are. Alrighty. Then we live in the mid latitudes between, let's say, 35 to 50 or so. And because of the spinning of the earth, we live in the westerlies. And for most of us, usually the wind is out of the west or southwest or northwest. That's why last Friday at 9ish in the morning, when I was watching the drizzle coming from the east, I knew the front had passed because the wind switched to the west and the temperature dropped and it turned to snow. So westerlies between 40 and 60 degrees north. And in general, air masses, unless something very unusual is going on, chug along at about 30 miles an hour. We talked about this too. So Buffalo's about, 90 miles, but maybe as the crow flies, let's round it off to 60. So if it starts to rain in Buffalo in a general pattern, I can count on 2 hours from now it raining on me down east of there. All right. We love to name these things. Have you heard of the Alberta Clipper? I always,
Oh, no.
oh, I love that one. That's because I listened to the Canadian radio station all those years. The Alberta Clipper used to be mostly in the winter, and it would come out of the northwest. Alberta is that
Oh,
way
sure.
about
Yep.
1,500 miles or so, and it would be a cold high.
Mm,
And so you'd have this storm come through pretty quickly,
mhm.
dump a bunch of snow maybe, and then it would clear off and it would be blue sky for 2,
Mhm.
3 days, and the temperatures would really drop.
Mm.
Maybe whatever, back down to 0 or 10 below in those
Mhm.
days, or 10, and stay away for a few days. That was the Alberta
Mhm.
Clipper. And we've all heard of the Northeaster.
Mhm.
Now, it took me a while of doing this business. Okay, maybe I'll turn around, guys, and then if you're watching my hand, you can figure it out, because we didn't look that up, did we?
No,
No.
I did not.
Okay. All right, you guys who never learned your geography. Florida's down here, and Maine's up here, and then Canada, the maritime provinces are up there. And it's not a straight north-south line, especially when you get to Maine, it begins to veer off towards the northeast. Storms are connected with low fronts.
Mhm.
Think of those hurricane pictures. And you've got this swirling mass with a counterclockwise. So if you're starting down in Florida and the center of the low is moving up along the coast,
Mhm.
by the time it gets to New England and then the maritime provinces, the winds are becoming out of the northeast.
Okay.
Because I kept thinking, why do they call it northeast?
Mhm. Right.
And I think that's why.
Yeah.
Okay. And for us on the East Coast, now usually those northeasters, unless it's a massively wide storm, because we're at least 300 miles from the coast,
Mhm.
it doesn't really get to us. Except once in a while, it's a very wide. And then, so I've always noticed if I wasn't paying attention to the weather reports, if the wind is out of the east and it's snowing,
Mhm.
once again, the low is below us. And it's bringing that yeah. And so until that low passes us, then the winds switch around to
Mhm.
back to the west or the northwest.
Hmm.
So, okay, what else? Have you heard of the Chinook winds?
I have, but I don't know.
That's a Native American word, I'm pretty sure. And it usually refers to the states along the eastern front of the Rocky Mountains. So eastern Colorado, Nebraska, Wyoming, Idaho, whatever,
Mhm.
on down in New Mexico. And once again, it's like what happened a week ago. You have weather conditions such that it could be the middle of winter, it could be 20 below, you could have 2 feet of snow out there in your pastures. And then these very warm, dry
Mhm.
winds come over the mountains and drop down. And sometimes the temperature goes up 50 degrees in an hour or two. The snow all melts. I think one of the nicknames for it is the snow eater.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then of course the tragedies if
It sometimes cause flooding.
flooding.
Yeah, like with the snow melt, maybe. Maybe I
Oh, well,
didn't talk about that.
then, you know what? My guess is that the air is so hot and dry
Mhm.
compared to the winter that it just evaporates
Okay.
rather than causes floods.
Hmm.
But you could check that. I don't remember reading of floods connected to
Okay.
Chinook winds.
Yeah, I was thinking-
Now, the other is a disaster. I don't know, do they have a disaster channel on the TV? Weather disaster channel?
It's all of them.
All of them? Well, no, those are all the disasters. Anyway, sometimes it's the reverse, like it was in Wyoming. And especially in the old days where they didn't have the weather reports the way we do
Mhm.
now. And so if you read your history about the high plains, it was a perfectly fine winter day,
Mhm.
you know, and the kids are at school, and then
Mhm.
all of a sudden. And so they close the school down and they send the kids home. And sometimes they rode horses or they
Mhm.
walked or they whatever. And if the temperature dropped like 50 degrees
Mhm.
and people would, like in Buffalo in their cars,
Mhm.
people would freeze to death. out there on the
Mhm.
high plains because the temperature would drop so rapidly.
Mhm.
But I don't know, that's not called a Chinook because it's the opposite. It's
Mhm.
like what happened last Friday. Alrighty, the jet stream. We did some research. Jordan, can we hear you? Can you try to get through to us sound wise?
Or you can type it in the chat.
All right, well, he could type it?
Mhm.
Oh. Yes or no, typed. Did you do the research on those pilots in the Second World War in England? Put him on the spot. He's playing hooky. Okay, and your daughter didn't find out anything?
No.
All righty, I'll start off and then she can talk about another incident. We didn't know much, if anything, about the jet stream back in the Second World War in the 40s, 1940s. And in the Peterson's Guide to the Weather, they had this interesting paragraph under the jet stream section that in 1943, a squadron of Allied pilots on a bombing mission into Europe ran into these extremely high winds that they had never encountered before. Now, I'm thinking it was 43, so we had arrived. In those days, early on, the Brits were still doing night runs, but we had bombers that could fly higher and therefore be safer from anti-aircraft. So we were doing daytime bombing runs. So I'm thinking it was an American squadron, and they ran into these high headwinds, and they kept going, using up more fuel than they'd planned, ran out of fuel over Allied territory, landed, were captured by the Germans, and spent the rest of the war, 2 years roughly, as prisoners of war. So I had asked Jordan to research that and find out if they survived. We can't seem to find anything online here, but Melanie and her daughter, who's here, school's off, they looked up and found something else.
Yeah, there was I don't remember if it was what side it was on, bombing over Japan
In 44.
in 44.
Okay.
They noticed their bombs were missing their targets, and in one instance hit a civilian and 5 Sunday school students.
Okay, so once again, flying up 20, 30,000 feet, B something or other, was it a B-17?
Yeah,
B
be something.
dropping their bombs, and the winds, you said, were what, 250 miles an hour?
Yeah.
Of course, the wind took the bombs off target. So once again, jet stream. What's the jet stream?
Oh, I do have a
Do we have a
of it.
picture of the jet
Yeah.
stream, right?
I thought I did. Oh, well, it's part of the polar vortex.
Okay, it's part of the polar vortex,
But you'll
was
see.
caused by the jet stream.
Yeah, you'll see that.
Okay. We talked about the Gulf Stream in the ocean, right? The jet stream is similar. It's a volume of air that's at the same pressure and temperature, moving at roughly the same speed, usually quite a high speed. It's very complicated. We won't go into all the details. We'll just pretend that it's like a hula hoop, and it goes around the earth around 60 degrees north. That's in Upper Canada. But it isn't a hula hoop that is even. It undulates like a goldfinch flying through the air, up and down, like a sound wave. And the nodes, the high points or the low points, are about 3,000 miles apart. And now we realize that the jet stream influences the weather North America, Alfred, New York, experiences. And as I said years ago in a gardening column, and Stuart, if you're listening, call me in on it. I had said, because of the 3,000 miles between the top and the bottom, or 6,000 between the bottom and the bottom, the general weather in California is opposite than on the East Coast. If we're having a
Mm.
milder winter, they're having a colder winter. So what is 6,000 miles away from us? It's Moscow.
Mhm.
So if we're having a colder winter, so is Moscow. But I didn't word it that way. And Stuart called me up and said, Mary Lou, can't imagine that Moscow and we have the same kind of weather.
Mhm.
I didn't mean the same. I meant the same compared to our normal.
Mhm.
So if we look at the jet stream, which travels from west to east, more or less, if it's swinging upward, as it is on the west coast there, it's going to suck up warmer, moisture, hotter air. And if we're on the east coast, like 2 years ago, and it really plunged, in
Mhm.
the old days, the wiggles were gentle.
Oh, okay.
Now, with our new normal, they're becoming much more elongated.
Mhm.
So it's getting hotter and hotter further north.
Mhm.
How hot was it in Oregon? Was it this summer or last summer? 110?
Yeah, yeah.
110 in
Mhm.
Oregon. The jet stream,
Mhm.
probably. And our polar vortex of a year or two ago sucked down from Hudson Bay, Greenland, and Siberia
Mhm.
this massive, colder than usual air. So, where's my water? It has not turned to ice or evaporated into gas. All right, jet stream. Alrighty.
And what causes the jet stream?
Oh, you shouldn't have asked
Oh.
me that. I'm okay. The general answer would be, once again, sideways. North pole's at the top,
Mhm.
South pole's at the bottom.
Mhm.
Remember those cells?
Oh, yeah.
Equator to 30 degrees, 30
Mhm.
degrees, 60. And then up at the top, it tends to go around, I think, northeasterly.
Okay.
Around and around. In general, that's what sets up our wind patterns.
Okay.
The earth tipped at a certain angle going around the sun, so we have seasons.
Yep.
Yeah. And the finer details,
Mhm.
I don't even think I read them. I said, I don't need to know this for 101 weather. However, that doesn't mean you can't go online or
Mhm.
get out a great book and read up more on it.
Mhm.
By the way, you put that book, I finally returned. I'm sorry. I kept out the American Weather Association book on the weather. I returned it, I think
Was it our book?
yeah. Yeah, our library book. We only
Oh,
have
I'll look for it.
2 books, I think, on the weather. And one on the cloud,
Mhm.
I think. So anyway, that was a great book with wonderful illustrations. It had a little more to do with the organization and how the instruments they use and their history and this and that, and not just the science of
Okay.
weather. If we have time at the end, mention barometer, and I'll mention
Okay.
explain a barometer.
Okay.
Because that's one of those genius instruments that once you see how it works, you think, gee, why didn't I think of that?
Mhm.
Alrighty. Our wind chill chart, I think we need to, because blizzard.
Oh.
I read something and I thought that's not right about what it defines a blizzard. So Melanie looked up and it was the official
Yeah.
What?
National Weather Service?
National Weather Service, which by the way, Ronald Reagan wanted to privatize.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Well.
Pay your dollar every morning to find out what the weather is going to be.
So I had always thought that a blizzard was just a lot of snow. Just anytime you got a lot of snow.
Oh,
Like that book.
like this book, right? Wait a second, this book, Blizzard, at the front it says, one winter day it started to snow and it did not stop. That does not
It doesn't-
necessarily make a
No.
blizzard.
No, a blizzard is a long period of time, generally 3 hours or more,
At least 3 hours.
with visibility less than a quarter mile. So that could be like just what snow that you have on the ground blowing around.
Yes, it could be a ground blizzard.
Mhm.
They call that when it's not snowing anymore, but
It's just blowing.
there's so much snow around, it's just blowing.
So visibility less than a quarter
Okay,
of
a
a mile.
quarter of a mile would be about 1,300 feet. Would that be a block in town, 1,300 feet? If everybody's yard was 50 feet wide, it'd be 26 houses down?
Yeah,
Okay. And
and winds of 35 miles per hour or more.
on a regular basis?
Yes.
Yeah.
That entire.
Maybe it would drop down to 20, 25 and then go up to 45, 50, but on an average, it'd be
Average.
35 miles an
Yep.
hour. We definitely had a blizzard in Western New
Mhm.
York a weekend ago. Okay, we shouldn't laugh about it. And we talked about Wyoming.
Do you want the wind chill chart?
Yes, let's get the wind chill chart. And how much time do we have left?
We have 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. All righty. Let's go back to equalizing out the universe. Heat going to the cold. We are a little furnace of roughly 98.6.
Mhm.
Let's say 100 degrees. And it was 8 below. Now, if it was 8 below and there was no wind, let's look at our wind chill chart. Without my glasses, can you find it, Melanie? And tell us.
This is 5 below or 10 below. It goes in increments of 5.
Okay, let's go to 10 below. And if no wind, what's happening?
It feels 10 below. But if it's at 5 below or
Okay, so it feels what it is.
Yeah.
10 below. Where do you start freezing? One of these blue and dark.
frostbite times, 30 minutes.
Okay. So you probably, do you have any frostbite at 10 below with a calm?
Yes, even at 5 miles an hour.
Okay,
Because
how
it
long?
feels 22 below.
All right.
And that's at 30 minutes.
All righty. So I remember the dump fight.
Mm,
A little over, oh my God, 30 years ago. And is that right? Yes, over 30 years ago. And that one morning, then we were out from dawn to the sun went down. It was 10 degrees out.
mm.
So where's 10 degrees?
Here's 10
Okay.
degrees.
And there wasn't that much wind. So was there, however, I got frostbite on my 2 circles on my cheek, like a nickel. And if I go out in the very cold where the cold and wind, it shows up,
Like
a-
still like scarred.
yeah, it must have, yeah, damaged
Yeah.
it slightly. Normally you don't see it, but when it gets cold, it sort of gets whitish. Alrighty.
So like at 10 below, if the wind was 30,
Let's go.
Oh, 50?
50 like it
it
was
would take 10 minutes to get
Alrighty.
frostbite.
to get frostbite, which is okay. Usually you can recover from frostbite. But what happens? What's the next category?
Then like at 10 below and the winds are 60 miles an hour, it takes 5 minutes.
Alrighty. Well, okay. And it was 70 below, wasn't it, in Buffalo? Yes, I mean,
the
70
wind-
hour, 70 mile an hour
yeah.
winds. So you realize, folks, get smart, listen to science, listen to what the weatherman said. I don't know, close to 24 people froze to death in Buffalo because they went out into it and got stuck in their car or whatever and froze to death. And to me, that is appalling. I don't think any of them were having a baby and had to get to the hospital. What were they doing? Not listening. So wind chill is deadly. Yeah, you've read about the Arctic explorers. They lose their fingers, they lose their toes, they lose their nose or their ears, but it can kill you. So, and then I want to mention our pets. We don't, sometimes doing craft fairs at 100 degrees temperature and the sidewalk is so hot and the poor dog that the guy that's walking his dog through the craft fair and the poor dog is,
Trying to get to the grass.
yeah, get off the hot griddle. The same thing in the winter. Now, I made up this funny little story. How dogs are really smarter than cats. I have a cat who never uses the pan. So she has to go out
Mhm.
at least once a day, preferably twice a day, but she hates the cold as
Mhm.
she's gotten older. Now, a dog is smart. If your dog has to go out, he'll go to the door and he'll sit. He'll say, I want to go.
Mhm.
You let him out. And it's like 10 below. He'll immediately, within 2 feet, do whatever he has to do and come right back in. But a cat, no. They got to go to their
The spots.
outdoor bathroom,
Mhm.
which for me, my cat is like 200 feet around the house into the woods. Then do they just do it?
Nope.
No, they got to find the perfect spot. And then they got to dig the hole. So it usually takes at least 10 minutes. And so, poor kitties. You feel for the animals. I'm sure quite a few animals
Mhm.
died in that, just because of the wind chill. Now dogs are smart in that most dogs will let you put on
Little boots.
booties. Forget it with a cat. I don't think a cat will let you put on booties. So be aware of yourself and your pets in this kind of weather. It doesn't take long
Mhm.
with those winds, and those temperatures. All righty. And the other suggestion I have is, I'm sorry, I don't care how poor you are. You can always manage to have some food stocked up
Mhm.
for an emergency. Years ago, when I visited my friend Jackie, who had just moved to Florida, tornado country,
Mhm.
no, hurricane country. So, well, they do both, but hurricanes. I noticed in her kitchen, up on the top shelf, all these generic food boxes. They were all white with black lettering.
Mm.
Macaroni, and then Jackie, being an artist, had taken a red paintbrush, I think, and across the boxes had written hurricane supplies.
Mhm.
And I said, really? She said, oh yeah, you have to,
Mhm.
be prepared. So, those people that maybe died going out for groceries because they had nothing in the house in Buffalo, what a tragedy. Think ahead. Don't let it happen.
Mhm.
All right. Especially in this day and age where the new normal is going to have more and more of these calamity type weather events. Now, we always had floods, but we had 100-year flood.
Mhm.
And now we have one every 10 years.
Mm.
Okay. Or the forest fires.
Mhm.
Yeah, they used to be, maybe 100 acres. We get them on,
Mhm.
and now they are thousands of acres. All right. And, yeah, once in a while, the sea got pretty high and I got a little bit of water on my front porch.
Mhm.
Okay. So you have to start thinking in terms of the new normal, which includes the weather
Mhm.
and how it's not like the old days. All righty. Do we have any other pictures?
What did we get? Oh, just the temperature from
Yes, I
Friday.
asked Melanie because it was such an interesting, now there was a newspaper too. Is that paper still out where the whole back page,
I
the
don't
national
know.
paper, I forget what it was called, but the whole back page was a big color map of like this of the weather. Are they still functioning or did they bite the dust?
I don't know.
I don't know either. Okay, but here we can see it was in the 30s in New York. What time was this? Did it have a time?
It does not.
And you know what? A picture is really worth 1,000 words, isn't it? You can see at a
Mhm.
glance with the color coding, what's happening. So we were 34 in the morning, and by the following morning we were 8 below. So that was like a 42-degree drop in, well, less than
Mhm.
24 hours, really.
And you can sort of see how it followed the jet stream.
Mm-hmm. Right, the jet stream. And when my daughter called on Friday, I think, from San Diego, down there, it was 75. It's sunny. So I said, Kathy, you're the only part of the country that's decent.
It's happy right now.
Yeah, yeah. So we're about out of time.
Yep.
Okay, next time we're going to talk about fun and games. enough of this dreary. Some folklore. And some optical effects. And I think we're gonna actually sneak in UFOs.
Ooh. Yeah, I'm intrigued.
She's intrigued. Alrighty, are we out of time?
We're out of time.
Okay, Jordan, why don't you give me a call in an hour when I get home, okay?